Okay, well, thanks folks for joining us this evening. We are here to do an informational session and a public hearing for a proposed permit at American Rec. I'm Jennifer Dixon and I work with our Environmental Support Division. So I'm going to be hosting the meeting tonight. We're going to go through a couple things before we get started on the details of the proposed permit. So one of the housekeeping things is just that all of your lines are going to be muted during the meeting. So once we get to the question and answer session, I'll remind you how to raise your hand if you want to ask a question. But we are also recording this meeting, and all of our public meetings get posted on Eagle's YouTube channel, which is YouTube/Michigan Eagle. So if you have to jump off for any reason or you want to watch this back at a later date, you can feel free to do that on the YouTube channel. Sorry, I went a little bit too fast. So there's a couple things that are happening tonight. The first thing we're going to do is do an informational session, like I mentioned, and that's going to be where we have some of our air quality division staff talking about the proposed permit, a little bit about how air quality works and how the permitting process works. And then we're going to get into a question and answer. So during the question and answer period, we'll be able to take questions from the audience if you have any. And I have a panel of staff, which I'll introduce in a few minutes, who will be able to answer those questions. Once we get to the hearing portion of the night, that's going to be an official hearing where we start it with an opening statement. We take your comments on the record, but we can't respond back to those comments. So I just kind of want to parse out those couple of differences. If you do have a question, you're going to just use that question and answer box at the bottom of your screen to type in your question, or you can click the raise hand icon on the bottom to raise your hand. For folks calling in, you're just going to press #2 on phone, and that's going to raise your hand for us. So the first thing I want to do before we get into the actual information session is I want to introduce our air quality division staff. But the first person that I want to introduce is Annette Switzer. She's our air quality division director. So Annette, I know you wanted to do a few words of welcome. So as soon as you're ready, you can go ahead and do that.
Hey, thank you, Jennifer. I want to take a moment to thank all of you for taking the time to attend this public hearing. We hope that tonight offers you the time to ask questions about the project proposed to Eagle, by American Rec to modify operations for an existing burn-off oven. Tonight we'll provide some insight into the process the Air Quality Division went through to get us to this point, including what is being asked by American Rec. And we'll answer your questions before we open the official hearing portion of our virtual event. I know taking time to be with us tonight takes you away from other things that you may have been doing. Public participation is an important and valuable part of our work. Whether you're here to listen or are planning to make comment during the hearing, I appreciate you being here. The comments you provide to us about projects like this one are helpful in ensuring every aspect of what American Rec is requesting is thoroughly reviewed. Your comments will be taken into consideration when I make a decision about the proposed permit. We will be communicating with all of you regarding the decision once it's made, and I will pass it back over to Jen so we can get through the rest of the evening. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Annette. So you'll be seeing Annette again once we get to the hearing portion because she is the official decision maker on this proposed permit. So if I can have the rest of my air staff turn your cameras on for a second so that we can introduce everybody. And if you guys can just say hello after I call your name so that folks can make sure to actually see your face. So one of the main people you're going to be hearing from tonight is the permit engineer on this project, and his name is Jacob Young. So he's going to be doing a lot of the info session and helping to answer questions once we get to that part. So Jacob, you want to just say hi for a second?
Hello.
Sometimes on Zoom, people's faces don't show up. So I just want to make sure that you guys are actually seeing everybody. Another person that you're going to be hearing from a little bit tonight during the info session is Cody Yazzie, and he is the inspector for this facility down in our Kalamazoo district. So Cody, do you want to say hi?
Hi, I'm Cody Yazzie.
And so Cody's going to be joining us a little bit more during the info session. Sorry, I don't know why I keep advancing the slides. I don't mean to. I need to take my hands off the keyboard. So I also have Brian Hughes. He is our toxics unit manager, and he's here to help us answer questions that might involve screening levels and things like that we use when we're making determinations about proposed projects, especially like this one where we actually do have some toxic screening levels. So he'll be here to help answer questions about that. And I have Susan Kilmer. She works in our air monitoring unit. She's the section supervisor there. So just a little bit about monitoring. When we're talking about Susan's work, her staff work with our stationary monitors around the state. So they're actually like cemented into the ground, so to speak. They don't move around, and they measure outdoor air quality, looking at all kinds of different things around the state. So Susan, do you want to say hi to folks really quick?
Hi, thanks for attending the meeting, and I'm glad to be here.
Then we have Alec Konacki, and he is with our air modeling. So he actually takes what a company is proposing to do and uses a computer simulation to see where would those air emissions go and make sure that anything that would be leaving the property is going to still be safe for public health and the environment. So Alec, do you want to say hi to folks as well?
Hello.
All right, so I think I introduced the panel. You'll be seeing them again later. So if everybody besides Jacob wants to go ahead and turn your camera off, we'll get right into this information session. So just again, how the evening will be run is we'll start off with our information session, which will be merely talking about the project, talking about air quality division. We'll do that question and answer session where we'll be able to ask questions of the panel and get answers. Then we're going to shift over into that public hearing. So again, that's a little bit more of a structured time where we open it up with an opening statement. We take your comments on the record if folks would like to give those. And then we close the hearing with another short statement. So it's kind of maybe a more formalized part of the night. And then if you don't want to give a comment tonight, you absolutely do not have to. There's plenty of time after this meeting to submit comments to us via email, on our voicemail, via US mail. So don't feel like you have to do it tonight. It's definitely not your only opportunity. I'll talk a little bit about how you can submit those comments if you want to do it in other ways, where to find other information, and then who you can contact with further information. So as we run through the information session tonight, once we get to the Q&A, we will go through your questions until it gets to 7 o'clock, or folks don't have any more questions. But we do kind of have a hard stop at around 7, and that's when we'll start the public hearing. So with that, Jake, if you would like to share your screen over mine, you can feel free to do that at any time, and then you can go ahead with your presentation. Yep, that looks great on my end.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, you sound great.
Okay. All right, good evening, everyone. Like Jen mentioned, my name is Jacob Young, and I'm the lead permit engineer who worked with a team of air quality staff here at Eagle to review American RAC's air permit application. Before we get into the details of the project, I'd like to briefly talk about what the Air Quality Division does and how the permitting process works. We all know that pollution comes from many different things, such as big farms, fuel-burning vehicles, and various industrial sources. The overall mission of the Air Quality Division is to protect public health and the environment. We provide this protection by using our authority under state and federal laws through the regulation of industrial sources. AQD staff do many different things. For example, we monitor levels of pollutants. We look at different toxic air contaminants to make sure public health is protected. We conduct inspections of regulated facilities like American RAC, and we review applications and write permits for sources of air pollutants to ensure that the operations comply with the rules and regulations in place to protect public health. The Air Quality Division has the authority to permit sources of air pollutants. However, I do want to point out a few items that the permit does not cover and that the AQD does not have the ability to regulate. You will want to talk to your local government if you have questions or concerns about issues such as zoning, noise, and traffic. Additionally, the AQD does not determine whether a facility or modification is needed when reviewing an air permit application. We evaluate a project to ensure that it meets the applicable air quality rules and regulations. I'd like to give a simple overview of the steps a company and the AQD go through to get a proposed draft permit ready for comment. First, a company decides that they would like to install, modify, or construct a piece of equipment, such as the proposed changes to American RAC's burn-off oven. The company submits a permit application to the AQD. The application goes through a review, during which the engineer evaluates the information the company submitted as it relates to the state and federal air quality regulations. If the project appears to meet the rules and regulations, the engineer creates a proposed draft permit. Once a proposed draft permit is reviewed by the AQD inspector, it's sent to the company for review, and in certain cases, such as this one, the proposed permit is posted for public comment. Public comment is a very important part of the permitting process. Anyone can comment on the proposed permit, including the company. Once the comment period ends, all comments received are evaluated and can potentially impact the permitting decision. Finally, a decision is made on the permit. The decision may be to approve the permit as written, approve the permit with changes, or to deny the permit. The decision is based on the ability of the company's proposal to meet air quality regulations. We cannot base our decision on the need for or popularity of a proposal. American RAC submitted an air permit application to request an increase in the amount of plastisol-containing coating that can be removed each year in the facility's existing burn-off oven. I'll explain more about what some of those terms mean in the upcoming slides, so don't worry if that was a bit confusing. So what is a burn-off oven? A burn-off oven operates similarly to your oven at home's self-clean feature. Where your oven might remove food residues, a burn-off oven can be used to remove cured coatings, paints, oils, or grease. Parts are loaded into the oven, which is heated to a temperature which breaks down any organic material inside. The exhaust gases then enter a secondary chamber, which raises the temperature of the exhaust to more than 1400 degrees Fahrenheit to control smoke and odors. The coating that American RAC is processing is called plastisol. Plastisol is made of polyvinyl chloride, also known as PVC, which contains chlorine. After curing, the liquid solidifies into a plastic-like coating that protects the material beneath. American RAC coats metal racks with plastisol to be used by the electroplating industry. After many uses, the coating degrades and must be refurbished. The burn-off oven is used to remove the old plastisol coating before the racks are recoated. Hydrogen chloride is released when materials containing chlorine are heated to high temperatures. To determine how much is emitted by the process, we assume that all of the chlorine in the plastisol is converted to HCl and exhausted to the air. Because the oven is fired by natural gas, emissions of oxides of nitrogen, carbon monoxide, sulfur dioxide, particulate matter, and volatile organic compounds are also expected, but emissions of these pollutants are expected to be very low. American RAC is requesting to increase the amount of plastisol that they are allowed to process in the burn-off oven in a year. As a result of this increase, American RAC is requesting to raise their current limit on the amount of hydrogen chloride emitted in a year. While reviewing a proposed project, the AQD looks at several things. We review the level of emissions to figure out how the project and the facility should be classified. Based on the level of emissions and the type of equipment, we determine what type of review is needed, including which rules and regulations the proposed project is subject to. Hydrogen chloride is regulated both federally as a hazardous air pollutant, as well as locally under Michigan's state-specific toxic air contaminant rule, known as Rule 225. In order to meet the requirements of Rule 225, computer modeling was used to determine whether or not the potential impacts meet the health-based screening levels. Projects that are subject to Rule 225, like American RAC's request for increased throughput, must demonstrate that the emissions from said project will not exceed Michigan's health-based screening levels. Based on our review and the results of the computer modeling, American RAC's proposed hydrogen chloride emissions meet the requirements of Rule 225. As a new major source of HAPs, American RAC is subject to federal regulations. The United States Environmental Protection Agency has previously determined that burn-off ovens are regulated under the new source performance standards for commercial and industrial solid waste incinerators. However, there are currently no requirements for burn-off ovens included in the standard. The proposed permit includes several changes from the facility's existing permit. The new permit includes increases in both the amount of hydrogen chloride allowed to be emitted and the amount of plastisol allowed to be processed in the burn-off oven. In order to verify that they are meeting these limits, American RAC must keep records on file to demonstrate that they are not processing more than they are allowed and that the burn-off oven is operating according to the manufacturer's specifications. There will be a panel of AQD staff that can answer questions you may have about the proposed project. But first, I'll pass it over to Cody Yazzie, who works in the AQD Kalamazoo District Office, to talk a little bit about the inspection process for facilities like American RAC.
Hi, can you hear me, Jacob?
Yeah, we can hear you,
Yes.
Cody. You're good.
Hi, my name is Cody Ozzie, and I'm the AQD District Inspector for the American RAC facility. I just wanted to talk about a number of ways that inspectors check compliance. One is by inspections. These are usually unannounced. When an inspector conducts an inspection, they are on site at the facility, looking at everything related to the permit, state, and local and federal regulations. This means physically looking at the equipment and the operation of that equipment. This includes stacks and control devices, along with thoroughly reviewing the records that are required by the permit. New sources are inspected within the first year of startup and then inspected on a regular basis after that. An inspector may also conduct additional inspections in response to complaints. A complaint investigation is similar to an inspection, although these investigations typically focus on the area of the plant which might be associated with the complaint. After we conduct an inspection, we write a report, and once the report is finalized, the report is posted to the Eagle website and is available to the public. I'm going to pass it to Jen to bring us to the question and answer portion of the night.
Yeah, thanks so much, both of you. I'm going to go ahead and just share my screen again. So thanks to Jacob and Cody. So just a reminder, I know we do have a couple people on the line that may have questions. So if you have questions, you can type them into your chat box that's going to be in your toolbar at the bottom of your screen. Or you can feel free to raise your hand and we can unmute your line if you want to ask any questions verbally. And if the rest of my panel wants to turn their cameras on, that would be great. So we can be ready to go. So I'll give you just a couple minutes to see if you have any questions here, and then hopefully we can get those answered for you. All right. All right, Jacqueline, I see your hands raised, so hold on for just a second. Let me unmute your line here. Okay, you should be able to unmute. There you go. I think we can hear you now.
Hi, can you hear me?
I sure can. Yep, go right ahead with your question.
The chat is disabled.
Oh, you're going to use the question and answer, not the chat. Sorry.
Okay.
I know that's weird. I don't know why it does that. I apologize.
I have a question. My question is concerning to the toxins that were mentioned in a couple previous slides. Where is the nearest monitoring, and would there be potential to add monitoring at or near the American RAC location to ensure that the levels are as needed?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to pass that first over to Susan, and then Susan, if you can kind of answer those two questions directly, where the monitors are, and then potential for adding other ones. But I also would like Alec to talk a little bit about the modeling that he did. So I know, Jacqueline, you might have joined a little bit late. I'm not positive if you heard this part or not, but we did talk a little bit about the modeling that Alec did, which basically kind of simulates that there's monitors all around the facility. And so I want him to talk a little bit about that analysis, if that will be okay for you. But I'm going to pass it over to Susan first to answer the first part of your question.
Sure. So there are several air monitors kind of in the area of the facility. I'll go through where some of them are located. So straight north, we have a rather large air monitoring station in Grand Rapids, and that's located at Monroe Street and Leonard. And that station measures a wide variety of pollutants. Over in Georgetown Township, which is about 20 miles northwest, there's a station there that measures a few pollutants. Directly west in Holland, we also have an air monitoring site. To the south, we have an air monitoring location in Kalamazoo. And then kind of northeast, we have about 35 miles away, we have a site in Belding that measures metals. We actually do have planned to be adding another air monitoring station in the Grand Rapids area along 131 north of, I think it's 44. And that station is going to be focused on near roadway monitoring. Because of the size of the greater Grand Rapids area, an additional air monitoring station is required in that area to measure near roadway pollutants. So that would be things like carbon monoxide and nitrogen dioxide and particulate matter. So I'm not sure exactly how close that would be to American Rec, but it would be, I'm going to estimate maybe like 10 miles to the north.
And so part of that too with our air monitors is they're not intended to measure specifically a facility. They're meant to measure the outdoor air, the air that's, around the state, to look for kind of trends and what things are going on. So they're not specific to a facility. They're not looking for what is that facility doing. So that's really where Alex's job comes in. I mean, his job when he does the modeling, which I know those two words are so close, so sometimes they can, get confusing, but the intent of the modeling really is to look at, this is what the company is asking. If we give them everything they're asking for, are they still going to be able to meet all the air quality rules and regulations and meet those health-based standards? So Alec, can you talk a little bit about what your review looked like when you were doing that air model?
Yeah, so kind of like what Jen just said, what we do in the model is we take all the parameters, the emission rates given by the facility, and we build it in the model. So we have everything there just to kind of emulate what the facility is, what it's looking like. Then we kind of export it to Google Earth to make sure it's lining up right, just based on images from those. And like I mentioned too, the emission rates of any pollutants that are going to be emitted, just to make sure that's accuracy along with those. And also once we get that built, we actually also build a receptor grid. And so what receptors are, they're somewhat of a pseudo monitor. So a monitor can't be used to measure something that is not there. So that's where receptors come in. So with the receptors, we put those all around the surrounding area of the facility. And those basically tell the model what future impacts are going to be for the pollutant. So in this case, I took the impacts from the receptors around the area, and these can be hundreds, sometimes thousands of receptors around the facility based on what is being emitted and how big the facility is. And so we take those impacts and we shift them over to Jacob or another permit engineer, and they take those and they do other calculations to figure out the impacts overall for the facility and pollutants.
So Jacob, just kind of rounding out that conversation, when you looked at the model that Alec did and you compared it with the health-based standards for hydrogen chloride, you still found that it would meet those standards, correct? Or can you kind of talk a little bit about your analysis there?
Yeah, so we have two screening levels for hydrogen chloride. We have a 1 hour screening level and an annual screening level. And so the calculations for both emission rates, the annual, I guess, averaged out over the entire year, and then the maximum possible hourly emission rate, both met the screening levels with the modeling impacts that were obtained.
So Jacqueline, I know we just threw a lot of stuff at you. Do you have any follow-up questions for that? You should be able to, yep, I see you can unmute.
I do,
so,
yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
So what concerns me is you mentioned the emission rates were provided by the facility. So then you talked about a receptor grid. So I just want to make sure the receptor grid was something that was placed by Eagle and monitored by Eagle, not that the emission rates were provided by the company.
So Jacob, can you talk a little bit about, I mean, this is what happens when we get a permit application. A lot of times that's part of the permit application. The company not only tells us what they want to do, but they give us their calculations of what those emission rates are supposed to be. So our job, or not my job personally, because I'm not a permit engineer, but Jacob's job is to look at those calculations and go, okay, those are right and those make sense, or those are not right and those do not make sense, and either going back to the company and saying you need to do this over, or doing his own calculations and saying, like, based on our best available knowledge, this is what those calculations would be. So he's not just taking their word for it, I guess, is what I want to tell you, Jacqueline, is that's not part of the process. We're not just saying like, oh, well, that's what they said. We're saying, okay, this is what you're saying. Now here's all of our checks and balances to make sure that what you're telling us is actually true. So Jake, I don't know if you can elaborate a little bit more on how you sort of looked at those numbers, because it is HCL, it does come under some pretty heavy scrutiny. And that is a really important part. So I'm really glad that you asked that question.
Yeah, that's generally the first thing that I do when I receive an application is that I go through and verify the calculations that the company has already done. Generally, I'll write out the calculations by hand on paper so that I have it in front of me, and I'll go through with my calculator and do each number step by step and make sure that I agree with each calculation that they've done.
And where they got those numbers. So they're not allowed to just pull them out of thin air. There's some pretty strict ways that we look at things. A lot of it's based on previous testing at similar facilities, or lots of different ways that it can be looked at. But that is definitely a big part of how the permit review goes. And even though sometimes I know it feels like the company is giving us all of that, they are obligated to do that. But our obligation is to make sure that all of that information that they've given us has been fact checked. So I know that was a lot too. So do you have any follow-ups on that one? I just want to make sure we get your questions answered if you have any other ones.
So one more clarification
sure.
on the receptor grid, please. So what is the receptor grid?
So Alec, do you have a picture or a map? Do we have one relatively readily available to kind of show what we're talking about?
I don't have it on me. This was also through a screen 3 run too, so I don't have that with me right now.
Okay, so yep, no, so the receptor grid is not something that the company gave us. This is something that is generated by a very specific computer program where Alec has to put in a lot of information, and then the computer program basically says, where do you want all your simulated monitors? And then he can lay them out in a certain way so they can be, when they're closer to the facility, they're really close together. So it'd be almost like, imagine one in everybody's backyard. And then as it gets farther away, those receptors are going to be more widespread. And what he has to look at, and what Jake looks at, is how do those receptor grids say those pollutants are going to be impacting things in the breathing zone? That's the really important part. And those impacts have to be passing those health-based screening levels, or the permit won't pass. We don't go out for comment if any of those things don't match up. So, but that is definitely something that we generate in-house in Eagle. Sometimes we do get models from companies that they've run, but again, our job is to completely fact check that information and make sure that anything that we've been given by the company is complete and accurate. So does that help answer the question?
It does. Thank you.
Perfect. All right. Just give another minute here to make sure we don't have any other questions from folks. Those are really good questions. I really appreciate when people come and ask us good questions, for sure. Okay, well, seeing no other questions, Annette, if it is okay with you, I'm going to go ahead and start the formal hearing.
Yes, you can go ahead.
Okay, so panelists, if you guys want to go ahead and mute and turn your cameras off, that should be just fine. Couple things just to go through here as we start on the public hearing portion. So just as a reminder, unlike the question and answer portion of the night, this is a more formalized process where I will read a quite dry opening statement. And I apologize, I've tried to shorten it up as much as possible, but still make sure we have all the important parts in there. And then we'll open it up for comments on the record. We won't be responding to any of those comments, even if you ask a question in your comment. And then once we're done with comments, we will close the comment period with another short statement. So I'm going to go ahead and read that statement and we'll get started. All right. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this public hearing. My name is Jennifer Dixon, and I am with the Environmental Support Division of the Michigan Department of Environment, Great Lakes and Energy, or EGLE, and I will be the hearing officer tonight. We have Annette Switzer, Air Quality Division Director, the decision maker for this permit application, listening to your comments this evening. She will be considering all comments prior to making her decision. This hearing is for a proposed permit to install for American RAC located at 1125 Morin Court in Wayland, Allegan County, Michigan. In this proposed permit, American RAC is requesting process and emission changes for their existing RAC burn-off oven. The Air Quality Division is responsible for regulating sources of air pollutants to minimize adverse impacts on public health and the environment. The law governing those responsibilities is Part 55 of the Natural Resources and Environmental Protection Act. Before the company can make the requested changes, they must obtain a permit that meets the requirements of Michigan's air quality laws. This means the equipment must be capable of meeting state and federal emission standards, including health-based standards. The proposed permit must also contain conditions that include emission limits and specific ways of operating the equipment to ensure these standards are met. The purpose of tonight's hearing is to give anyone interested in the proposed changes an opportunity to provide information the department may use in deciding whether to approve the permit to install or if there are additional issues to consider. Please note the proposed permit to install is still a draft permit. This does not mean the department has already made a decision. Instead, it reflects an initial technical review of the proposal. We hope having the details of the draft permit available to you will help you in providing comments. Everything in the draft permit remains open for comment and further consideration by the department, including whether the permit will be granted at all. Please recognize the department can only use the information you provide if it relates to the criteria the department must use when making a decision. For example, concerns related to local zoning, truck traffic, and noise are not within the department's authority. Some of you may want to simply express your support or opposition to the proposed project. We will be happy to make note of your position, but please understand the department is by law not allowed to base our decision on whether there is widespread support or opposition to the proposed project. This hearing is being recorded and your comments will be part of the information the department will consider in making its decision on the proposed permit. The public comment period for the proposed permit began August 25th, 2022, and will end at midnight on October 10, 2022. Additional comments or information may be submitted through that time via written or verbal comment during this hearing, by email, or by voicemail. After the close of the public comment period, the decision maker will review all written and verbal comments received. All significant air quality related comments will be considered, at which point a final decision on the permit application will be made by the decision maker. The decision maker may deny the permit, approve as drafted, or approve with amendments. If approved, the decision must specify which provisions of the draft permit, if any, have been changed in the final permit and the reasons for the change. In all three scenarios, all interested parties, including anyone who was on the original mailing list, anyone who provided comments during the public comment period, and anyone who attended the public hearing, will be directly notified of the decision. Included in the mailing will be a letter from the decision maker regarding the decision and, if applicable, the approved permit. As stated previously, you may submit a comment at any time during the comment period by US Post or email, or you may call in a comment to the public comment voicemail. You may also type the word comment into the question box and submit your comment. I will read aloud all comments you submit via the question box unless you state do not read. If you would like to make a verbal comment, you may raise your hand and I will unmute your line so you can speak. Please recognize the department staff are here tonight to provide a fair opportunity for you to express your views on the proposed project and to listen to those comments. Thank you so much for your attention, and I will now call the names of anyone who has indicated they would like to make a comment. So if you would like to make a comment, again, you can type that comment into the question and answer box, or if you want to raise your hand, I'm happy to unmute your line so that you can verbalize your comment. We'll just give you a couple minutes to decide if you'd like to do that, and we'll go from there. So we do have one comment, and the comment is from Jacqueline Hoist, and the comment is, I would like to request air monitoring in Wayland. Please consider the direction of the prevailing wind. So thank you so much for that comment. Okay, Nat, I don't see any other comments coming in. So are you okay with closing the hearing at this time?
Yes, we can go ahead.
Just going to go ahead and read the closing statement, and then we have a couple other things to go over, and we can close out for the night. So thank you so much for taking the time to participate in this meeting tonight. We appreciate your interest in protecting Michigan's air quality. As indicated at the beginning of the hearing, the public comment period will close at midnight on October 10, 2022. All interested parties, anyone who provided comments during the public comment period, and anyone who attended this public hearing will be directly notified of the final decision on this proposed permit. The hearing is now closed. Thank you so much. Okay, so a couple other things just to go over in case they're of interest. A couple things about submitting additional comments. If you'd like to submit any additional comments, you can do so really easily. Like I said, we'll take those by mail. You can send an email to the Eagle AQD PTI public comment email, or a lot of times the easiest way is just to call in a voicemail to the public comment voicemail box, which is 517-284-0900. You can find a lot more information about the project if you haven't already. So if you go to michigan.gov/Eagle Air Public Notice, you can choose air permits. There's a bunch of other things that might be open for comment, rules, and stuff like that, enforcement actions, but you will find the permits open for comment there. And on that section, you can find the proposed project summary, which is a very high level summary of what a company is proposing, the technical fact sheet, which details in a little bit more depth the review that Jacob did for writing the draft permit conditions. You'll find those draft permit conditions, and then you'll also find, once we post it up there, a link to the recording of this meeting. So there's a lot of great information out there if you're looking for more, you want to dig a little deeper into some of this. Here's the folks that are on the panel tonight. So I'm just going to read out Jacob's name and information, just because if you don't remember anybody else, hopefully you can get a hold of him and he can direct you to the right person. So again, that's Jacob Young, and his email address is youngj30@michigan.gov, and his phone number is 517-582-5218. So I apologize for preemptively forwarding the slides again, but again, we really do want to thank you so much for participating tonight. Jacqueline, thank you so much for your questions. Again, we always really appreciate that. If you have any other questions, comments, concerns, please feel free to reach out to any of us, and we're happy to have a good conversation about that. So with that, I'm going to bid you all a good night, and we'll hope to talk to you soon.